Welcome to another video.
So I wanted to do a video about intercity trains here in China. I hopped on a train from Shenzhen to Guangzhou, and during my journey I actually decided I'd change the topic because I realized that it's very different taking long distance transport here in China compared to the West. So I decided to change this video to traveling etiquette in China. Let's start by talking about buying tickets. Now, if you are a Chinese citizen, it's actually incredibly convenient to buy a long distance bus or train ticket here in China. You can buy online using your ID card. It is possible to do it as a foreigner as well, but all the websites and everything are in Chinese, so you're going to have a Chinese person to help you. And it can be confusing sometimes because your passport number is generally a lot shorter than a Chinese ID number. However, even if you have bought your ticket online, you still have to go to the ticket counter to collect it when you reach the train station or bus station. Now, there are also kiosks spread around the city, which is quite convenient, different kiosks where you can go and buy a ticket. But inevitably, as a foreigner, you're probably going to have to go to the actual ticket kiosk at the train station or bus station to buy your ticket. And this is where the first problem when it comes to etiquette occurs, and that is queuing, or I should say the lack thereof. Now, there's no beating around the bush here. In China, queuing is more of a suggestion than a rule, and it's incredibly frustrating for anyone who comes from a Western country where we're very used to rules. Queuing up means you stand behind the person in front of you and you wait your turn. Here in China, it's like a mad rush to get to the front, and if you can cut in, you cut in. And it's incredibly frustrating. This is unfortunately a result of a vicious circle. You see, if you try to queue correctly, you will always end up last. In other words, people will constantly cut in front of you and push you out of the way and make it to the front, and you may never actually get onto your train, or you may never actually get onto the metro, or you may never actually get to the window to buy your tickets. So people tend to push and shove because people push and shove, and like I said, it's a vicious circle, and it's something that you have to be prepared for. It is a little bit better in the first tier cities like Shenzhen, where I live, but as soon as you get slightly outside, and still even in Shenzhen it's a problem, you will notice people constantly pushing and shoving their way in. You have announcements on the metro systems which say, please let people get off before you get on. However, while the announcement's being blared out on the speakers, people are trying to force themselves into the train while people are trying to get out. So you have a situation where people cannot actually get out of the train at their station because there's a wave of people pushing themselves in. So it's incredibly frustrating, and this is something that you must be prepared for if you're going to be traveling in China. Now, China has an impressive and ever-growing network of high-speed trains. In fact, it's probably one of the most impressive in the world. And the best thing about it is they don't talk about it, they do it. So you constantly see new high-speed rails being put into place, new intercity trains, and every year you suddenly have a new option. You can suddenly take the high-speed rail to Guilin, or you can take the high-speed rail to Sichuan or wherever, and it's constantly growing. Unlike in the West, all the bureaucratic red tape, it takes forever, and they talk about making a high-speed rail for 30 years and it never materializes. Over here it does happen. So the high-speed rails are incredibly convenient, and it's a fantastic way to travel around China. However, there are definitely quite a few things that are going to annoy you and make your travel on the high-speed rail incredibly unpleasant. So we've talked about the queuing. Let's move on to some of the other things that might really get to a Westerner like myself. I'd like to talk about seat assignments. When you buy your ticket, you are given a seat number and you're given a carriage number. And it's fairly simple. It's printed on the ticket, and you find the car or the carriage that you're in, and you find your seat. However, around about 50% of the time I've taken the train here in China, when I arrive at my seat, there's somebody sitting in it. And that is because people have a very relaxed attitude towards seating. So they just sit wherever they want, and only if someone comes and asks them to move will they consider it. Sometimes it results in a sort of a fight or an argument, but most of the time they will move if you show them your ticket. It's just incredibly annoying that people don't respect the seating arrangements. In fact, even this time on my way up to Guangzhou, there was an elderly gentleman sitting in my seat when I arrived there. But after showing him my ticket, he moved without any problem.
这是冷暴力吗？
The next thing I'm going to talk about here is noise. Now, this may not seem very apparent to people when they're going to travel that they have to worry about noise. But when you're traveling on the high-speed rails or on buses or wherever in China, be prepared for a lot of noise. In fact, especially if noise bothers you, I suggest you bring earplugs with you. Because, well, first of all, people tend to speak very loudly in China. When they're speaking to their friends behind you, or if they're talking on the phone, they'll speak incredibly loud. They don't have any regard for the people sitting around them, really. On top of that, you've got these constant announcements over the radio, and I'm not joking when I say that the announcement goes on for about 20 minutes after leaving the station. It seems like it just doesn't stop. And then, finally, when it stops, you arrive at the next station and it starts up again, because every time you arrive at a station, it plays the same announcement recording for about 20 minutes. And it can be quite infuriating, especially since it's in a language you don't understand and it's just going on and on and on. They normally speak it in Mandarin, then they speak it in Cantonese, and they don't have English as far as I'm aware. But if noise bothers you, please bring some earplugs. Talking about noise, children are also not very well controlled in China. Part of the cultural situation, probably something to do with the fact that there's a one-child policy, but children are incredibly spoilt. And so they run rampant, making noise, jumping up and down, kicking your seats, and the parents won't often say anything. And so I often find myself asking them very nicely in Chinese, please don't kick my seat, or please don't run, or, please stop bumping into my leg, or whatever it is. And I don't want to seem like a grumpy old man, but it is actually quite ridiculous. In fact, Similk and I just did a video about cinema and movie theater etiquette, and some of the very same topics cropped up. If you want to take a look, you can go and watch it. We went to go check out a cinema and we talked about all the similar problems when it comes to children running around and noise, etc. Now, the next thing, which is probably one of the hardest things for most foreigners to get over, is the lack of respect for personal space. Growing up overseas, if you grew up in a Western country anyway, you're quite used to this concept of personal space. In other words, more or less an arm's length around you is your personal space, your little bubble. And if anyone encroaches on that space, you start to feel uncomfortable and worry if they're going to steal something from you or molest you or do something along those lines. Well, in China, due to the fact that there's such a massive population, this idea of personal space doesn't really exist. And so every time you find yourself in a train or on a bus or something similar to that, you will find people standing right next to you, in fact, very often bumping into you, touching you, pushing you, shoving you, and it's incredibly frustrating as a Westerner. If you look at this footage over here, you can actually see that people are just in a big mad rush all the time to try and force their way to the front, try to get to where they're going, and they have absolutely no regard for personal space. So, just be prepared. Either do what I do, which is stand back and wait for the mad rush to be over and then take your time, or brace yourself, watch your personal belongings, and, enter the fray. Another thing that can be very irritating is the fact that people tend to carry large luggage with them. So they're always blundering around with their luggage and leaving it in the middle of the aisle or leaving it at the top of stairs or the top of an escalator in your way, so you very often have to clamber over their luggage or try and navigate all these different big packages lying all over the place. You get used to it, and after a while it's not such a big issue, but just also be prepared for that. Also, be prepared for certain delays which common sense would normally avert, such as people arriving at a ticket machine and not having the correct kind of change to use the ticket machine, or even not understanding how to use the ticket machine, especially when you have people coming from the rural areas into the cities. I very often have to help local Chinese people use the ticket machines and understand how they work. And this is just a result of, like I said, people coming in from the rural areas, especially during holiday seasons, to travel. Traveling in China can be incredibly confusing and, of course, very frustrating because you don't understand the language, you're going to have trouble. A lot of the signs are not in English, all the tickets are in Chinese only. If you want to listen to the announcements, they are only in Chinese. So it's quite difficult. What I've done is, in the description below, I've put down a couple of very key phrases in Chinese and the English. You can copy and print it out if you ever need to travel. Things like, where can I buy a ticket? I need to buy a ticket to such and such a place, etc. Also, remember that you are going to have your passport on you when you use any of these different public transport systems. And in fact, before you board, they have to check your ticket and match it up to your passport. Or I have been successful to use my Chinese driver's license as well in certain cases. But just bear that in mind, it is important. You can't just go and buy a ticket. You do need your passport in order to buy the ticket in the first place. And then you will be checked when you get onto the train itself. Also, don't lose your ticket, because when you try to leave the station, you can't leave unless you produce your original ticket. And this is to prevent people from just sneaking on and riding for free. Right guys, it's time to wrap this video up, but I just have to say that I don't want to paint traveling in China as a wholly negative experience, because it isn't. In fact, it can be incredibly rewarding. I've met some really interesting and lovely people along the way. Chinese people in general are very hospitable, and in fact I've had, for instance, while I'm on these long distance trains, I've had local people offer me food and try to talk to me and, you know, be very nice, etc. It's just a developing problem, a developing country problem, I should say. All these small problems, they're all a lack of etiquette, and it's basically just because China's still catching up and has a long way to go. But then again, so do various other countries. So as somebody coming from a developed country, just be prepared to experience what it's like to travel in the developing world, and you'll be okay. That's really it for this one, guys. Can't wait to see you in the next video. And until next time, as always, stay awesome.